The hall of the Galactic Council stretched wider than the human eye could follow. Walls of crystal shimmered in colors that seemed to shift with thought, and voices from 100 different species filled the chamber like waves crashing against stone. This was supposed to be the heart of peace, the place where disputes ended before they became wars. But on this day, the air inside the chamber was heavy with irritation, and most of it was directed at one group, the humans. It had not been long since humanity had been welcomed into the greater network of civilizations. At first, other species had been curious about Earth and its people. Some had even admired how quickly humans adapted to new environments, how they managed to turn dangerous, unstable planets into homes. But admiration had slowly turned into suspicion. Unlike most species in the Council, humans didn't like endless debates or secret agreements. They said what they thought directly and without much concern for politeness. Where others carefully measured words, humans cut straight to the point. The latest dispute had become the breaking point. A resource-rich moon on the edge of Council space had sparked arguments between several older civilizations. Each one wanted control, and the Council had gathered to work out a compromise. The solution, as usual, was expected to be a delicate balance of favors, side agreements, and long speeches that gave every species a little piece of the prize. But when it was humanity's turn to speak, they refused to play along. The human delegate, standing tall in the center of the Council floor, spoke with calm but firm words. The moon does not belong to any one of us. It should be shared fairly, without hidden deals. The resources there should go to all who need them, especially those colonies struggling to survive. If we cannot be honest here, then what is the point of this council at all? Gasps echoed through the chamber. For many species, such bluntness was almost an insult. The council thrived on careful words, not on accusations spoken so openly. A reptilian elder from a long-established empire hissed in outrage, accusing humans of arrogance. Another delegate, with skin like flowing silver, declared that humanity's attitude showed they were too primitive for galactic politics. But the human delegate did not back down. "We will not agree to corruption dressed as compromise," they said firmly. "If that makes us stubborn, so be it. But we will not bend to decisions that harm the weak and favor the powerful." The words carried through the chamber, but instead of respect, they sparked anger. One by one, delegates began to speak out against humanity. They accused Earth of refusing to adapt, of thinking they knew better than civilizations that had survived for thousands of years. Some claimed humans were dangerous, a species from a death world who had no place in peaceful councils. Behind the polished words, there was something else brewing: fear. Humanity had shown they were different, and difference was always unsettling in a place where unity was prized above all. Many species had grown used to compromise, even when it was unfair, because it kept the peace. But humans questioned that peace, and by doing so, they threatened the delicate balance the council had built. As the debate dragged on, whispers began to circulate in private corners of the chamber. Perhaps humans should not remain in the council, some said. Perhaps it would be better if they were excluded. The idea spread quickly. Some saw banishment as a way to protect the harmony of the council. Others simply wanted to remove a voice that disrupted their own power. And a few feared what would happen if humans continued to gain influence, because if they would not play the old game, then the rules themselves might change. The humans noticed the growing hostility, but they did not flinch. They held their ground, insisting that their way was not arrogance but honesty. They argued that bending the truth and hiding behind endless speeches had only created deeper mistrust. To them, real peace could only be built on fairness. Still, the council chamber was not a place that welcomed blunt truths. It was a place of performance, of speeches designed to please everyone without solving anything. And so, every time a human spoke, more delegates turned against them. One representative from a proud warrior species slammed their fist against the table. "Humans refuse to negotiate. They think themselves above the council. How can such a species sit among us?" Another, from a race known for long lifespans and even longer memories, nodded solemnly. "If they cannot learn diplomacy, they must be cast out before they do real damage." The chamber grew louder. the voices harsher. A vote was not yet called, but the direction was clear. Humanity was no longer seen as a young, promising species. They were becoming a problem, one that many thought should be removed before it grew too large. For the humans, it was a strange position to be in. They had not come to dominate, nor to disrupt. They had come to stand for fairness, to protect those who had no voice. And yet, that stance had turned them into outcasts. As the meeting ended for the day, the human delegation walked out in silence, aware of the glares that followed them. Beyond the chamber walls, whispers carried through the vast halls of the council city. Messengers, aides, and watchers repeated the same phrase. The humans will be banished, it is only a matter of time. But on Earth and its colonies, the story sounded different. News of the council's anger spread quickly, and while some were nervous, most humans responded with the same stubborn spirit that had defined them for centuries. If they want to push us out for speaking the truth, many said, then let them. We will not change who we are. In the quiet hours of that night, as stars burned over the council city, the stage was set. The council believed humans had gone too far, refusing to bow to the old ways of negotiation. Humanity believed they had done nothing but stand for honesty. Between those two beliefs, a wide gulf had opened, one that would soon shape the fate of not only Earth but the entire galaxy. What no one realized then was how quickly everything would change. The whispers of banishment were only the beginning. Something far greater was coming, something that would test the council, the humans, and every civilization across the stars. And when that test arrived, it would no longer matter who was polite, who compromised, or who played the game of politics. What would matter was who stood firm when the galaxy needed it most. And humanity, stubborn as always, was already preparing for that moment, whether the council accepted them or not. The following weeks inside the Galactic Council chamber grew more tense with every meeting. What had started as irritation toward humans now turned into open hostility. Delegates from powerful civilizations began speaking directly against Earth, sometimes with sharp words and sometimes with carefully hidden insults. The humans, however, did not back down. They sat at their place in the council hall, shoulders straight, voices calm but firm. And every time they spoke, they reminded everyone that fairness mattered more than deals made behind closed doors. But the more they spoke, the more enemies they seemed to make. Old civilizations, ones that had ruled the stars for thousands of years, did not appreciate being challenged by a younger race. To them, humans were children who had wandered into a room meant for adults. Instead of showing respect, these humans dared to call out corruption. That was something the council had tolerated quietly for centuries. And now someone was pulling the curtain away. In the long halls outside the chamber, groups of delegates whispered together. Some asked, why should we allow humans to stay if they refuse to play by the rules? Others said, their words are dangerous. They stir unrest. They will break the unity we worked so hard to build. Soon, speeches inside the chamber carried those same thoughts. A representative from a shining insect-like species stood up one morning and declared, humans are not here to cooperate. They are here to disrupt. They twist honesty into a weapon and make the rest of us look weak. The words were followed by a murmur of approval from many others. The humans listened without flinching. When their turn came, their reply was calm. We are not here to disrupt. We are here to make sure truth is not lost in shadows. If peace is built on lies, then it is not peace at all. That answer won no applause. If anything, it made the atmosphere colder. It was not that the other species disagreed entirely. Some of them secretly admired the humans' courage, but admiration in silence was not enough. No one wanted to stand beside them publicly. To support humans meant angering powerful allies, and very few were willing to risk that. The rift grew day by day. Humans noticed they were being excluded from private discussions. Invitations to informal gatherings where many deals were truly made stopped arriving. When they walked into the grand hall, eyes followed them, not with curiosity anymore, but with suspicion and irritation. One evening, after a particularly bitter debate, the council's presiding voice suggested forming a committee to evaluate humanity's place within the council. Everyone understood what that meant. It was the first real step toward banishment. The news traveled fast across the galaxy. On distant colonies, whispers spread like fire. The council wants humans gone. For many civilizations, it was simply gossip. For Earth, it was a direct threat. Back home, people reacted in different ways. Some were angry, insisting that humans should never bow down. If they want us gone, they said, then let us walk out on our own terms. We don't need their counsel. Others were worried. Being cast out would mean losing trade, losing allies, maybe even being isolated from the galaxy. And in the endless dark between stars, isolation could be dangerous. The leaders of Earth debated among themselves. Some argued for softening their stance, making peace with the Council, even if it meant swallowing pride. Others believed that bending now would destroy everything humanity had stood for so far. Meanwhile, inside the Council itself, the attacks on humans became sharper. Delegates accused them of being reckless, pointing to humanity's history on Earth. A history filled with wars, revolutions, and conflict. They come from a violent planet, one representative said loudly. A world where survival meant fighting. Do you think such a species can ever bring peace to this hall? The words stung, but the humans did not deny where they came from. One of them replied quietly, "Yes, we are from a hard world. But it is because of that world that we value fairness so deeply. We know what happens when power is left unchecked. We know what happens when the strong take everything for themselves. That is why we speak the way we do." It was the truth, and some in the hall shifted uneasily when they heard it. But truth was not enough. The Council wanted harmony. Harmony even if it was fragile, harmony even if it was fake. And humans, by their very nature, refused to pretend. As the days turned into weeks, a strange kind of isolation settled around the humans. They were present in every meeting, their voices firm and clear, but it felt like they were speaking into a storm. No matter what they said, the outcome was already being shaped. The committee that had been formed worked quietly behind the scenes, collecting statements, preparing reports, and building the case that humans were not fit for membership. Back on Earth, the tension was heavy. Families followed the news closely. Workers on colonies discussed it in dimly lit halls after long shifts. Soldiers stationed in orbit wondered aloud if the galaxy would soon turn against them. Some feared the worst, that banishment would not stop at words, that the Council might even declare sanctions or worse, war. And yet, beneath the worry, there was also something else. Stubborn pride. Ordinary people said, "We did not climb from our world's storms and struggles just to be told to stay silent now. If speaking truth means exile, then so be it." That stubbornness echoed the very same spirit their delegates carried into the Council chamber. The divide between humans and the rest of the Council grew deeper than anyone had expected. It was no longer about one moon or one resource dispute. It had become something bigger, a clash of values. The Council wanted compromise even if it was false. The humans wanted honesty, even if it was unpopular. In quiet corners, some smaller species whispered their admiration. They too had suffered under the shadow of stronger civilizations, forced to accept deals that were never truly fair. But they stayed silent, afraid to step forward. No one wanted to be the one to stand beside Earth. No one wanted to risk being pulled into the storm that now surrounded humanity. And so, the humans stood alone. They walked into the chamber day after day, aware that most of the hall wanted them gone. They spoke their truths anyway. They endured the whispers, the accusations, the cold stares. They endured it all because deep down they believed something the others had forgotten, that peace built on lies never lasts. What the Council did not realize, in their rush to push humans out, was that the galaxy was about to change. Events were already moving beyond their control. Something was approaching, something no negotiation could prevent, and when it arrived, the very same stubbornness they now hated in humans would be the only thing strong enough to save them. But for now, the humans stood in the middle of the storm, surrounded by voices demanding their banishment. They did not know yet what was coming. All they knew was that they were being cornered, pushed toward the edge of exile. And still they refused to bow. The Council chamber with its glittering walls and endless voices had turned against them. But in that defiance, in that refusal to give up what they believed in, humanity showed something the others could not yet see. They were not weak. They were not arrogant. They were exactly what the galaxy would one day need. And soon, very soon, that truth would be revealed. The day the vote for humanity's future in the Galactic Council was being prepared, something happened that no one expected. It began quietly, far out on the edges of known space where colonies of smaller species lived in peace, far from the grand politics of the Council's core worlds. Traders and miners working in those regions were the first to see it. Strange lights moving against the stars, fleets of ships unlike anything they had encountered before. At first, people thought it was just another group of explorers. But then the signals came, desperate distress calls filled with fear. The invaders did not negotiate. They did not announce themselves. They came like a storm, tearing through outposts and settlements. Their weapons burned through defenses that had protected civilizations for centuries. They destroyed without warning and without mercy, leaving silence where there had once been life. News traveled quickly. Within days, the council chamber was buzzing with panic. Delegates who had once spent hours arguing about words now shouted over one another in fear. Species that prided themselves on calm diplomacy suddenly showed their terror. Reports poured in. Colonies falling, fleets destroyed, millions of lives lost. The council, so used to endless debates, found itself frozen. While the chamber drowned in arguments, the humans listened. They were not surprised by the chaos. On Earth, they had seen storms before, storms that swept away everything if people wasted time hesitating. To them, this was no different. Survival meant action, not endless words. When their turn to speak came, the human delegates stood up. Their voice carried across the chamber, clear and strong, cutting through the noise. You can argue all you want, but the truth is simple. A threat is here, and talking will not stop it. We must act. Not tomorrow. Not after another debate now. The words struck the chamber like a bell. Some species shouted back, accusing humans of trying to seize power. Others demanded time to study the enemy, to send spies to form new committees. But humans had already made their choice. They would not wait for the council. Back on Earth, fleets were mobilized. Warships were prepared, soldiers trained, supplies gathered. Humans moved fast. Not because they were reckless, but because they knew hesitation could mean death for millions. The council might not have trusted them, but humanity could not stand by and watch worlds burn. The first human fleets reached the attacked colonies within weeks. What they found shocked even them. Entire cities had been reduced to ashes, survivors scattered across broken landscapes. The invaders were unlike any enemy they had faced before, ruthless, precise, and relentless. They did not speak. They did not respond to signals. They only advanced. Most council fleets had already retreated, unable to withstand the onslaught. But the humans did not retreat. They fought back with everything they had. Their ships darted into battles that seemed hopeless, buying time for civilians to escape. Their soldiers landed on shattered worlds, guiding survivors onto transports while under fire. They did not wait for orders. They acted. Stories of human bravery spread quickly. On one colony, a handful of human soldiers held a defensive line for 3 days against impossible odds, protecting thousands of refugees until rescue ships arrived. On another world, human engineers worked side by side with alien workers to rebuild damaged defenses, refusing to leave until the last family was safe. For the first time, the galaxy saw humanity not as stubborn troublemakers, but as protectors who stood firm when others fled. The same stubbornness that had made them unwelcome in the council now became their greatest strength. They refused to give up even when the enemy seemed unstoppable. Meanwhile, inside the council chamber, panic grew. The invaders kept advancing, and every meeting dissolved into shouting. Some species demanded surrender. Others demanded the humans be placed under control, fearing their growing influence. And yet, it was the humans, those same arrogant newcomers, who were actually fighting to save lives. One delegate finally stood and asked the question that many were already whispering. If not for the humans, how many more colonies would already be gone? The hall fell silent. It was a question no one wanted to answer. Still, pride and fear kept the council divided. They could not openly admit they needed humanity, but outside the glittering chamber the truth was clear. Whenever distress calls went unanswered by the great powers, it was humans who arrived. Whenever defenses collapsed, it was human ships that stayed behind to cover evacuations. In the darkness of space, far from the halls of politics, the image of humanity was changing. To the frightened civilians being rescued, humans were not arrogant or stubborn. They were lifesavers. To the soldiers of other species who saw humans fight beside them, they were brothers and sisters in arms. To the smaller colonies that had long been ignored by the council, they were a sign of hope, The invaders, however, did not slow down. Wave after wave of ships pressed deeper into known space. Entire sectors fell silent. It was clear to everyone that the Council's usual way of handling problems, slow talk, endless committees, careful compromises, was useless against an enemy that did not care for words. The galaxy had entered a fight for survival, and survival demanded action. The humans kept fighting. Their fleet suffered heavy losses, but they adapted quickly. Where other species stuck to old strategies, humans improvised. They laid traps, used decoys, and turned asteroids into weapons. They studied the enemy and found weaknesses others had overlooked. They were not stronger than the invaders, but they were more unpredictable. And unpredictability saved lives. Still, the cost was heavy. Ships returned home scarred, filled with wounded. Families on Earth mourned those who never came back. Yet even in their grief, the humans pressed forward. They could not afford to stop. As the battles raged, something began to shift inside the council chamber. Delegates who had once demanded humanity's banishment now spoke with less certainty. They could not deny what was happening outside. Reports showed human fleets holding the line where others had broken. Testimonies from rescued civilians praised human courage. Even those who disliked Earth could no longer claim they were useless, and yet many still hesitated to admit the truth. Pride was hard to swallow, especially for civilizations that had considered themselves far wiser and older than humanity. To admit dependence on a young species felt like an insult, but reality was undeniable. The galaxy was at war, the Council was powerless, and humanity, the very species they had wanted to exile, was standing between survival and destruction. Back on Earth, people did not know if the Council would ever accept them. Many no longer cared. What mattered was saving lives, protecting colonies, and making sure the invaders did not advance further. The humans had entered the Council to be part of something greater. Now they were proving through blood and sacrifice that they already were. And as the war dragged on, whispers began to spread in a different direction. Instead of banish the humans, people now asked, what would have happened without them? It was a question that grew louder with every victory, with every rescued world, with every act of courage carried out by those stubborn, uncompromising humans who had once been treated as outsiders. The Council had wanted them gone. The galaxy had doubted them. But when the greatest crisis in centuries struck, it was humanity who answered first. And soon everyone would see the truth, that the very refusal to bend, the very trait that had nearly gotten them exiled, was exactly what the galaxy needed to survive. The war was no longer just whispers at the edge of the galaxy. It was everywhere. Entire systems were under attack, trade routes cut, colonies destroyed. Fear ran deep through the halls of the Galactic Council. Delegates who once argued endlessly about politics now struggled just to keep their voices steady. The invaders did not care for speeches or treaties. They advanced like a tide, unstoppable, merciless, and yet amid the chaos, one name kept coming up in every report. One word repeated across every transmission: humans. At first, the Council had tried to ignore them. Even when human fleets launched daring counterattacks, many leaders dismissed it as recklessness. But as the weeks turned into months, a pattern became impossible to deny. When colonies were abandoned by their supposed protectors, human ships arrived to fight. When worlds were left defenseless, human soldiers stood at the gates. When millions were trapped, it was human pilots who flew into fire to carry them out. It was not that humanity had the largest fleets or the most advanced weapons. In fact, many of their ships were smaller, older, and weaker than those of the great powers. But they fought differently. They did not waste time waiting for perfect plans. They did not argue over who would take the lead. They moved quickly, adapted on the fly, and refused to quit, even when every logical calculation said the battle was lost. On one shattered colony, survivors remembered seeing human ships swoop in when their own defenses had collapsed. They didn't hesitate, an elder recalled, her voice trembling with emotion. Others promised help but never came. The humans arrived. They stayed until the last of us were safe. Stories like these spread across the galaxy. For every council fleet that retreated, there was a tale of humans holding the line. For every speech about unity that fell flat, there was a memory of human courage that could not be erased. Slowly, the image of Earth's people began to change, but inside the council chamber, pride still stood in the way. Old civilizations could not easily admit that the newcomers they had almost banished were now the only ones keeping them alive. Meetings turned bitter. Some delegates argued that humans were acting out of selfishness, trying to gain power. Others said humanity's refusal to follow protocol was dangerous. And yet none of them could deny the numbers. Without human action, the loss would have been far greater. The human delegation, however, never wasted time with pride. They were not there for praise. Every time they spoke, their message was the same. Stop arguing, act. Lives are being lost while you sit here debating words. Many disliked their tone, but even more disliked the truth behind it. Back on Earth, families lived with the cost of that truth. Every day, names were broadcast. Soldiers who had fallen, ships that had not returned, colonies that had been saved at great sacrifice. People mourned, but they also stood taller. They understood that this was not just about Earth anymore. Humanity had stepped into a role larger than itself. They were fighting not only for their own survival, but for the survival of countless others who had once doubted them. Among soldiers, a quiet determination grew. They knew they were outnumbered, often outgunned, but they also knew that hesitation would doom them. A pilot, before launching into battle, told his crew, "We may not win every fight, but we will make sure someone else gets to live." That spirit carried across the fleets. Even alien soldiers began to notice. At first, they were wary of fighting alongside humans, but after seeing their resilience, their willingness to share rations, their refusal to leave anyone behind, those doubts faded. Soldiers from different worlds began to trust humans with their lives, and when stories of mixed crews fighting together reached the Council, it shook old assumptions. The so-called Death World species was not feared on the battlefield. They were respected. The Council's hesitation, however, was wearing thin. Every day they delayed decisions, the enemy pushed further. Whole sectors slipped away while arguments dragged on. Some delegates finally admitted aloud what many already knew. Without humanity, there would be no defense left. One day, as the chamber echoed with yet another argument, the human delegate stood and spoke. Their voice carried not with anger, but with certainty. "You call us reckless. You call us arrogant. But while you debate children are dying, we are out there. Not because we want glory, but because someone has to stand between this enemy and the innocent. If you cannot act, then step aside. We will." The chamber fell silent. No one could deny the truth of those words. No one could erase the image of human fleets fighting on the front lines while others hid behind speeches. For the first time, the Council faced the reality they had tried to avoid. Their survival depended on the very species they had tried to exile. And beyond the chamber, ordinary people across the galaxy already knew it. Refugees whispered thanks to the humans who had saved them. Colonists lit beacons in honor of the ships that had arrived when no others would. In the darkness of war, humanity's light burned brighter than anyone expected. But the war was not over. The invaders still pressed forward, and every battle was a test of will. Humanity did not claim to be saviors. They did not claim to be perfect. They only knew one thing, that giving up was not an option. In the silence between battles, human crews shared simple moments, repairing damaged ships, cooking meals together, sending messages home. These small acts reminded them of what they were fighting for. Not just survival, but life itself. Ordinary life, filled with family, laughter, and hope. The Council might have doubted them, but out in the stars, humanity proved themselves again and again. Their stubbornness, the same trait that once made them unwelcome, became the reason others survived. And slowly, even the most prideful civilizations began to see the truth. The galaxy did not need more debates. It needed action. And in the end, it was the humans, stubborn, flawed, determined humans, who gave it. They had stepped forward when no one else would. They had carried the weight when others had faltered. And though the war still raged, one thing was clear. The galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again. What began as suspicion had turned into respect. What began as talk of banishment had turned into whispers of gratitude. And soon, the Council itself would have no choice but to face a question that none of them had ever expected to ask. Could humanity, the very ones they had wanted to exile, be the reason the galaxy survived? The answer was already written in the stars, in the battles fought and the lives saved. Humanity had already shown it. and the galaxy was finally beginning to see. The war had finally ended, but its marks remained across the galaxy like deep scars that could not be erased. The invaders had been driven back, and silence once again returned to the skies that had echoed with explosions and the cries of countless lives. Yet the memory of that dark time lived in every mind, especially within the council that had once spoken of banishing humanity. They could not deny the truth anymore. If it had not been for the humans, the galaxy might not have survived. When the council gathered again, the hall was quiet in a way it had never been before. The same leaders who had once argued endlessly, who had raised their voices against Earth, now sat in silence. They remembered how humans had stood firm when everyone else had lost direction, how they had fought when others had wasted time on talk. The council knew that something had shifted forever. At first, no one wanted to speak. It was as though shame weighed heavy in the air. Many species had called humans arrogant, stubborn, and unfit to be part of the galactic community. But when destruction came knocking at their doors, it was those same stubborn humans who had refused to let anyone fall. They had acted while others hesitated. They had saved colonies, shielded families, and sacrificed without asking for reward. Slowly, one by one, delegates began to speak, not with anger, not with accusation, but with gratitude. They told of how human ships had arrived at the last moment to defend their worlds. They told of how human soldiers had fought side by side with those who once distrusted them. They told of courage that spread like fire across the stars, giving hope even when hope seemed impossible. For the first time, the stories of humanity were not twisted into accusations. They were spoken with respect. The council had gathered that day to make a decision, not about banishment, but about recognition. It was clear to everyone that the galaxy could not stand without the strength of Earth. Yet what mattered most was not just their strength, but their refusal to compromise when compromise meant injustice. Humans had taught them that peace built on lies and hidden deals would never last. True peace required honesty, even if it hurt. True unity required someone willing to say no when everyone else stayed silent. When the council speaker finally rose, their voice carried a weight it had never carried before. They declared that humanity was no longer to be seen as an outsider, no longer to be threatened with exile. Instead, humanity would stand as one of the pillars of the galactic community. Their stubbornness, once seen as a weakness, would be recognized as strength. Their unwillingness to bow down would be honored as loyalty to what was right. The announcement echoed across every world. To some, it was a relief. To others, it was a lesson they had needed to learn for a long time. The galaxy had lived for centuries in a cycle of endless debates where words often outweighed actions. Now they had witnessed a different way, the human way. Imperfect, yes, but filled with courage, honesty, and the fire to act when action was needed. Back on Earth, the news reached homes and families who had feared for their loved ones during the war. They learned that their sacrifices had not gone unnoticed. Children who once wondered if their world was unwanted by the stars now heard that their people had saved them. Farmers, workers, teachers, and builders, ordinary humans, felt pride in knowing that their determination had changed the course of history. But humans themselves did not celebrate with arrogance. They knew the cost of what had been won. They remembered the friends they had lost, the colonies that had burned, the families who would never return to their homes. Their strength had been proven not by triumph alone, but by the pain they endured and the will to keep going. And so, while the council spoke of recognition, humanity simply returned to its work. They rebuilt cities, repaired ships, and planted new fields on scarred worlds. Their way was simple: to protect, to endure, and to move forward no matter what stood in the path. They did not seek praise, but praise came anyway. Species that once saw them as dangerous now sought their guidance. Leaders who once mocked them now asked for their wisdom. The council that once wished for their banishment now relied on their presence. Over time, the phrase Deathworlders took on a new meaning. It was no longer spoken as an insult, but as a mark of respect. It meant those who could survive what others could not, those who could face storms that broke others apart. It meant those who carried a spirit so strong that even the darkest of times could not put it out. The galaxy had changed forever, and at the heart of that change stood humanity. Not because they had negotiated clever deals, not because they had spoken sweet words, but because they had refused to surrender their principles. They had refused to let injustice pass quietly. They had refused to stand by when others needed them, and so, when history was written in the years that followed, There was always one moment that stood out, the moment when the Council had nearly cast humanity aside. That story was told again and again, not as a tale of shame but as a reminder. It reminded everyone that the galaxy had been saved not by endless talk but by action, not by compromise at any cost but by courage that would not bend. From then on, whenever the Council met and debates grew too long, someone would always say, "Remember when humans refused to negotiate?" Those words carried a weight no one could ignore. They reminded the galaxy that sometimes standing firm is the only way forward, and thus the people of Earth, once threatened with exile, became the protectors of many. Their spirit became a guiding light, not just for their own kind but for all who called the stars their home. The Council no longer questioned their place. Instead, they looked to humanity and knew, when the darkest hour comes again, it will be the humans who rise first. That was their legacy. That was their truth, and the galaxy would never forget it.